and field work. Gabe can be found hiking and camping in the mountains surrounding northern New Mexico or playing music with friends. So thank you, Gabe. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us virtually here. And I really appreciate that first session, and welcome to the International Wildfire Prevention Workshop. It's a real honor to have a chance to speak to you all this morning. As Karen said, my name is Gabe Kohler, and I'm a program manager with the Forest Stewards Guild. I will share a little bit more about my background and a bit about the Forest Stewards Guild, the organization that I work for, in just a moment. But before we get started, I thought it might be kind of nice to try and use this poll function on Excel events to ask you all some questions and get to know who's in the audience a little bit. I know we have a lot of expertise in the room, in this virtual room, and as a social scientist, I can't help but try and take advantage of that and kind of ask you all some questions. So let's see how this goes. I have a couple questions I think it'll just pop up on your screen. So let's give this a shot. This first one is, just trying to get a sense of how many of you folks are working in the United States and how many might be working internationally. And so I believe this poll is open now. It'll be in the sidebar kind of with the chat there. So you can go ahead and let me know if you're working in the United States or in another country. And I think it should share the results with you all so we can kind of get to know who's on. I'll give just another couple seconds on that one. Okay, we got a couple folks. Oh yeah, kind of a majority in the United States, but definitely some from other countries. It's great to have that range of experience here. I got another one here for the folks that are in the U.S. I'm interested in what region are you working in? And if you're working internationally, you can hit the other option. I'd love to have questions for all of you internationally, but with the scope of this polling platform, I don't know if that's realistic. So just do a couple seconds on this one. I really like to kind of hear who I'm talking to out there. It's nice with these virtual platforms. This is a great option to have here. So I'm going to end that poll in just a second here. Okay, so we've got a lot of folks and others. Nice range. Looks like I'm looking at the percentages here. I think you all are seeing this. Some folks from the southern area, a lot of folks from the eastern area, majority from the eastern, and then that 24% in the other is probably our international folks. Great. Let's see. I'm wondering also what scale are you all focused on? And this one, if you're not sure, you can just go ahead and hit that other option here. But just trying to get a sense of whether you're working at this real local watershed scale on fire prevention, or maybe some other broader scale. For the international folks, if this doesn't fit your national structure, you can try and find something that kind of matches maybe the scale that you're working on. So we can kind of get a sense. I'm really excited to be able to speak to such a broad group of practitioners today. So I'd like to capture that and kind of understand the reach of this conversation over the next couple days. Okay, I'm going to end this poll in just a second here. Let's see. And looks like there's the majority we have a kind of a mix between statewide and regionally. We certainly have folks working at that watershed scale, county, municipality, and then a couple in that don't quite fit that breakdown. So I'm also curious about your expertise or your experience, I guess I should say. So here I'm just trying to capture, how long have you been working in fire prevention and awareness and reducing human-caused ignitions? Be interesting to see kind of, I know there's a lot of experience in this virtual room, so great to capture that. All right, just do another couple seconds. Oh, did that one not go? There we go. Sorry about that. Now this one's open. How long have you been working on fire prevention awareness and reducing human-caused ignitions? I'll just let this sit for a couple seconds here, and then we can take a look. All right, another couple seconds, and I'm going to end that poll. Yeah, we have a lot of folks that have over 25 years of experience. Certainly some folks that are in that 0 to 5 year category, kind of getting involved maybe earlier in the career or different part of their career. And then we have a wide range there. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for participating in that. I think it's really interesting to to figure out who I'm speaking with and kind of gauge the experience in the audience that we have in the room here. Great. Well, at this point, I'd like to kind of jump in here. As I said, my name is Gabe Kohler, and this talk is about investing in fire prevention. It's a longer talk, so I'd like to just give a little bit of an outline. I'm going to start by giving some of my personal and professional background. I want to talk a little bit about the Forest Stewards Guild, the nonprofit that I work for. I want to share some of the prevention approaches that the Forest Stewards Guild has been a part of that we really work to tailor to the local needs. So I'll share some kind of approaches that we've used. And then going from those practical approaches, I want to share a little bit of the research that we've been working on in the last 4 years or so. We have a 2018 report that kind of looks at fire prevention and kind of reducing human-caused ignitions and the scope of the problem broadly. And then we have a more recent report that looks at investment in fire prevention awareness. And we look specifically at Forest Service ranger districts, but I think some of those findings might be applicable to other agency structures as well. And then finally, I want to talk about how we might be able to kind of work through partnerships and kind of grow the conversation around fire prevention and share the responsibility for fire prevention more broadly. Something that I'm really excited to talk about over the next couple of days and to hear what you all think about that. Great. So I'll just start off real quick here, sharing a little bit about myself. Who am I talking to you all today? So my name is Gabe. I grew up in the dry, fire-prone forests surrounding Spokane, Washington, northern Idaho, and western Montana. So up there in the Northwest. I spent a lot of time camping and outdoors growing up with my family. It was a part of my family dynamic from a young age. And so when I got into my teens, it became an important way for me to kind of get out of, connect with something bigger than myself, to go out in the outdoors. I remember smoky summers almost every year in the town where I grew up. And I remember, folks lighting the bluff on fire with a campfire or a firework almost every year. So this conversation around fire prevention is something that, I've kind of grown up exposed to these fire-prone forests and these kind of fire-prone ecosystems. And that conversation has been kind of ongoing throughout my life. And so with most of my family being from the rural parts of Montana and my grandfather having worked as part of the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC, I grew up with a huge respect for those that make their livelihood working in the woods, as well as a deep respect and appreciation for the natural world itself. So this kind of respect and appreciation continued into my college days, where I crossed paths with a lot of people that worked in the woods. And I learned a lot from these people that worked out in the woods. And through time, I realized kind of how humans have influenced the landscapes that I considered wilderness growing up. I learned how our current forest and fire conditions reflect a history of active management. And they reflect this interrelatedness between our human communities and our forested landscapes. And so one way that human communities have always been linked with forested communities is through our relationship with wildfire, as you all know. And so my interest between this linkage between human communities, forests, and wildfire brought me to the Oregon State University College of Forestry, where I pursued a Master's of Science in Forest Ecosystems and Society. And as Karen mentioned early on, I really consider myself a student of fire and the philosophy of Paul Gleason. I'm continually learning from fire, as well as our conversation about fire. So this includes work that I'm doing on and off the fire line. So from coordinating events for community wildfire adaptation, to research on fire prevention, to serving as a containment resource on prescribed burns in my local landscape. And so really just trying to bridge the gap between research and practitioners as much as possible in my career. That's a goal of mine. And so my interest in working at the intersection between forest communities forest and communities brought me to the Forest Stewards Guild. My work with the Forest Stewards Guild, I'm based out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I work as a program manager within our Southwestern regional office. And since the Guild is relatively small, I might take a second here to just let you know a little bit about the organization. So the Forest Stewards Guild is a national nonprofit that's based out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we practice and promote forestry that is ecologically, economically, and socially responsible. The organization started as a membership organization, working with consulting foresters over 25 years ago. And we continue to provide science synthesis and best management practices to folks that are working on the ground. So we have this really tight connection with forest-based communities. The Guild is committed to training and encouraging the next generation of natural resource leaders. We have coordinated a youth conservation corps program in partnership with the state of New Mexico and the Forest Service for over 25 years. And through this Forest Stewards Youth Corps, we have developed professional relationships with many New Mexico communities while providing employment opportunities, training, and a helpful workforce to local ranger districts. So these youth corps really help us connect with the communities that we work within. The Guild manages forest restoration projects on public land to prepare fire-adapted forests for the reintroduction of fire. So we work with a diverse array of partners from federal, state, and local agencies, as well as youth and volunteers to implement prescribed fire as a forest restoration tool and to build capacity for that prescribed fire workforce. That's a large part of what the Guild does, is capacity building around forest restoration in general. Our programs in general help forested communities learn to prepare for and live with wildfire as a key component of a resilient forest. So that's a large part of the Guild as an organization. The Guild's work is informed by both in-depth rigorous science and place-based experiences. We speak to managers and ask those working on the ground about their experience to help guide our research endeavors. That's really important to our approach, is kind of figuring out what questions should we be asking. And we work really closely with managers to find that out. We also work closely with academics and research communities through the Southwest Fire Science Consortium, and we conduct our own research, such as the recent fire prevention report and our upcoming research that we're going to be completing through the Joint Fire Science Program. And finally, the Guild works in partnership. The Guild partners with federal, tribal, state, and local governments, as well as nonprofits across the country. In the Southwest, we have a long-term partnership with the Forest Service, and we're focused on working together with the Forest Service and not on litigation. And working at these different scales, everywhere from the national level down to the local level, really helps our organization stay connected to the realities of forest-based communities. And I think it makes us effective as an organization. So that's a little bit about the Forest Stewards Guild. And so, just after I kind of sharing some of the background of that organization I work with, I kind of want to switch gears here and talk about why the Guild as a non-governmental organization is interested in fire prevention and kind of how we've been involved in fire prevention. So kind of switching tracks here. And this is really, in our landscape, we've seen some mega fires like the Wallow Fire and the Las Conchas Fire. And again, whenever we see fires like this, the question comes into our mind of, if we can't fight these kinds of huge fires, what else can we do? And so the Las Conchas wildfire is a great example of a preventable wildfire that led to huge impacts. In the first 13 hours of the Las Conchas fire, it burned over 44,000 acres, which is almost an acre a second. So just that speed, it was devastating. Over the next weeks, the fire grew to be over 156,000 acres and became the largest wildfire in New Mexico's history. The fire started with a tree falling onto a power line, which then began extremely flammable vegetation from a record-breaking dry year and allowed the fire to grow quickly, pushed by strong winds. This fire resulted in the removal of vegetation and organic matter, which held the forest soils in place. And in New Mexico, we're prone to annual monsoon season that comes right after fire season. And monsoons result in high intensity precipitation from July through early September. And so when you combine these two factors, the loss of organic matter holding forest soils and then this high intensity precipitation, the conditions created catastrophic erosion and fire impacted watersheds. And so we saw a really devastating loss of crucial water resources for New Mexico communities that were surrounding the Las Conchas wildfire. And we're still continuing to clean up and kind of do post-fire rehabilitation in some of those areas. Another good example of a preventable wildfire in our area was the Wallow Fire that burned 500,000 acres, 500,000 acres across Arizona and New Mexico in 2011. And this fire was started by two campers. The fire burned 4 commercial buildings, 36 outbuildings, over 32 residences, and required immediate post-fire rehabilitation for an estimated cost of $109 million. And again, if we can't fight these kinds of huge fires, these mega fires, what else can we do? And so kind of to try and get to that question here, at the Guild, we are the mindset that achieving substantial reduction in human-caused wildfires, particularly these large wildfires, requires effective science management partnerships. These partnerships are essential to promoting interventions grounded in best available science and help us reframe fire prevention as a collective cross-boundary risk management challenge, which I think aligns well with the cohesive strategy. And this involves working across diverse jurisdictions to foster collaboration between communities, governments, agencies, and organizations. And so to be effective, these partnerships must collectively address all 3 sides of the fire prevention triangle across a continuum of local to national scales. Locally, efforts include, but are not limited to, community outreach, school education visits, signages, and forest patrol. These small-scale approaches often require a bottom-up approach that requires voluntary public engagement in order to be successful. But on the other hand, larger-scale efforts, including forest closures, fire bans, and media campaigns, might typically take a more top-down or regulatory approach. And so we need both this bottom-up approach and the top-down approach to be effective. And I think that again aligns well with the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. And this collective cross-boundary approach to fire prevention is well aligned with the cohesive strategy in general, and it advises us to develop fire-adapted communities, and specifically recommends that we emphasize programs and activities that prevent human-caused ignitions, and that these prevention programs should be tailored to meet identified local needs. And so this kind of matches the DNA of the Forest Stewards Guild, I think, really well. This kind of top-down and bottom-up approach fits the different scales that the organization works at. This collective cross-boundary approach is really well aligned with what the Guild has done for a very long time. And also these science management partnerships are very much a part of what the Guild has done for a long time. And so we want to be a part of the fire prevention conversation, and we really want to work to help tailor our efforts to meet local needs by working with a diverse set of partners from the watershed scale all the way to the national scale. And so that's kind of how the Guild has become a part of this fire prevention effort alongside you all. And again, I'd just like to take a pause here as I kind of shift gears. So that's kind of the why of why the Guild is involved in fire prevention and kind of what brought us into this conversation. But now I'd like to share just a little bit of the how. How have we been involved? What are some of the approaches that we've tried in our landscape? And so, we really look at it as a wildfire, human-caused wildfires as a social problem situated within an ecological context. And so we really work with the relationships that we've had, professional relationships in our communities for a long time, to tailor our education and outreach efforts to address this social problem. And I just want to say here, we're not here to provide answers to the challenging problem of reducing human-caused ignitions, but really we're just here to offer our perspective and to generate discussion over the next couple of days. And so I hope that this talk can kind of share some approaches that we've tried and just kind of fuel discussion with this group of practitioners that has so much expertise. And so I'm going to show some of the things that we've tried in our landscape. So yeah, here's a couple efforts. We created this fire prevention poster in 2018 to help kind of revamp some of the old signage on the Santa Fe National Forest. This prevention poster was created in partnership with the National Forest. We worked closely with prevention officers to create this messaging. And then we also worked with them to kind of evaluate the effectiveness of this poster. And we reached back out to the prevention officers that helped us with this, and they reported that this poster was effective at reducing the number of abandoned campfires over peak weekends like Memorial Day and the 4th of July. And so after they put these up, we looked at kind of the trend of abandoned campfires and saw that there was a decrease in years where we used these new posters. Another approach that kind of fits with this virtual approach to fire prevention was this social media effort that the Guild was a part of last year. So leading into peak holidays like Memorial Day weekend, the Guild convened and coordinated with an interagency group of fire prevention officers to create and share fire prevention messages on social media. Now, these social media cards were shared widely in hopes of reaching forest adjacent and urban audiences with prevention information. And I know that all of you have seen the challenge of reaching out to urban audiences that are going to visit forests on peak holidays. And so this was really trying to reach some of those urban audiences before they visit for big holidays and to kind of share that prevention message. And when we looked at the analytics following this social media effort, we were able to look on Facebook to see how many views that these posts got. We saw that over 300,000 people saw these fire prevention messages. And so it was a very cost-effective way for us to get a lot of visibility on a fire prevention message leading into those very crucial times like Memorial Day weekend. And it was shared through the Fire Adapted New Mexico Learning Network, New Mexico State Forestry, the BIA Wildfire Management Branch, BLM New Mexico. We had multiple soil and water conservation districts involved, radio stations, and local community and fire department pages that pushed this consistent message out. We all used the same cards and we put our logos on the bottom of it to show that we are unified around the message and that we are all in agreement about this message. So that was a little bit broader. That was kind of more at a statewide scale that last effort was, or maybe a regional scale. But we also work at our watershed scale. So in our Santa Fe community, the Guild has worked with our local watershed coalition to share wildfire prevention messages. So this first flyer that you see on the left was distributed through a local soup kitchen, for example, and it shared campfire safety information with unhoused populations that live in the forest surrounding Santa Fe. So we all know there are lots of homeless people that really depend on National Forest land to kind of live on for part of the year maybe. And these folks have campfires as well, and they're also out there all the time. And so we wanted to share some messaging about campfire safety with that population and kind of help kind of spread the information there. And then the second message here on the right that reads, "Be smart, don't let a wildfire start," was actually posted on pedicabs or bicycle cabs that cover the downtown Santa Fe area. So these are really visible. There's about 4 or 5 bicycle cabs, I think, that circulate around the plaza in downtown Santa Fe. And, they cover a lot of ground in that area. And they also, I think, reach a lot of tourists down there in the plaza area. So they're effective at spreading that wildfire prevention message with folks that might be in the Santa Fe area just for holidays or just for a short time. So I think that was an effective way to kind of reach some of those temporary visitors. So those are some of the approaches that we've tried. We'd like to continue to try more things. Through these efforts that we've worked with fire prevention personnel on, we learned a lot. We learned a lot by working with FMOs, fire management officers, and fire prevention technicians. And as an organization that's provided management guidance for over 25 years, the Guild really wanted to dig deeper and research prevention more generally. And so here I'd like to kind of change gears yet again to talk about how those practical approaches led us to want to learn more. And so now we're kind of wanting to do some research about how we can be more effective. We just wanted to make sure that we're focusing on the right areas, really. So to learn more about fire prevention as a component of a successful wildland fire management strategy, the Guild began to invest in research around fire prevention. And so this 2018 report that you see up here on the screen, the cover there, is titled Increasing Wildfire Awareness and Reducing Human-Caused Ignitions in Northern New Mexico. And this report was designed to help support wildfire prevention by identifying how people start wildfires, common locations of human-caused wildfires, existing public awareness campaigns, and current investments in public awareness of wildfire. And this report focused primarily on the Forest Service prevention programs. And the reason for that is that, of the 346 million acres of forest land in the Western US, 120 million acres of that are managed by the Forest Service as national forest land. So 34% of the forest land is managed by the national forests. So we thought that would be a good starting place for us to kind of enter the world of fire prevention is by focusing specifically on Forest Service fire prevention programs. And also the Forest Service has, since its creation 100 years ago, has led kind of the effort to raise awareness on how to avoid wildfire ignitions. So we thought that this would be a good kind of starting place for us to explore fire prevention. And in this report, we found that there was important evidence demonstrating effectiveness of fire prevention programs that were maybe not reflected in our wildfire preparedness investments at the national level. And so we looked at that and we saw, that the Forest Service asserts that for every dollar increase in preparedness funding, there's a decrease in $1.70 of suppression costs. And so when you put that in the context of large preventable wildfires like the Wallow Fire, had investments been made to prevent the escaped campfire that caused that fire, over $100 million in suppression and immediate post-fire rehabilitation could have been avoided. So, that was one kind of, we're seeing that this is effective, but we're not necessarily seeing the level of investment that reflects that. In general, we know that prevention education efforts used in combination with fuel reduction is effective at minimizing the costs and losses from unintentional wildfires. There's a couple studies that reflect that. There's a study by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, tribal units, that show that program benefits from prevention were 4.5 times greater than the costs. So for example, if a prevention program might cost $1 million, it may avoid a wildfire that would cost $4.5 million to suppress. And so it seems like a good bang for your buck there. And of course, many of you may be aware of this Prestimon et al. Study that was conducted in the Florida area that found that wildfire prevention education efforts significantly reduced the number of wildfires ignited by debris burning, campfire escapes, smoking, and children and that the additional reduction in wildfire damages were 35 times greater than the additional cost of prevention education. So looking at these numbers from the outside, we're trying to understand, as taxpayers, it seems we should be advocating for more investment in fire prevention, but we wanted to better understand how funding is allocated currently for fire prevention and kind of get to know that a little bit better. So that was really what grounded the 2018 report. The 2018 report helped us better understand the scope of the problem around human-caused ignitions. Everyone in the audience today knows that human ignitions are not a simple problem, and we wanted to make sure that we captured the complexity around this subject and that complexity was reflected in the report. As you see here on this is a national, the graph showing kind of the acres burned by wildfire nationally in the US. And so on average, we saw that human-caused wildfires burn over half of the total acres burned in a given year. And of course, different regions of the US have different patterns of fire and different ratios of human and natural ignitions. And so here you can see some of that regional variation in the US. You can see how different regions, for instance, the southern US has a higher percentage of human-caused wildfire at 81% than when it's compared to other regions such as the Northwest, where only 26% of the acres burned are human-caused. And in addition to the amount of human-caused ignitions, The primary source of human ignitions also varies by ecoregion. So for example, in marine coastal forests of Washington, agriculture is the important predictor of wildfire ignitions, while in the Great Basin and interior deserts, distance to railroads is more important. And so when we looked at data from the US Forest Service, which provides insight into the relative impact of different types of human ignitions, we saw that abandoned campfires are the most common single source of human ignitions. And so this variation in the types of human-caused ignitions is a familiar challenge to you all, I'm sure. As you know, people start wildfires in a wide variety of ways. Vehicle exhaust pipes, cigarette butts, and poorly extinguished campfires are all common causes. Of course, we have faulty power lines and infrastructure-related failures as well. And each of these different types of ignitions may require a different approach to prevention and may necessitate different partnerships to share information around that prevention. So here, this graph highlights that in the Southwest, campfires are a huge factor in our human ignitions. And when we did an examination of the sources of human ignition by acres rather than the number of ignitions, it showed that on average, wildfires in the miscellaneous category have burned the largest percentage of the acres burned by human ignited wildfires since 2001 in the Southwest. So this miscellaneous category, when you look at acres burned, is very important in the Southwest. And so we'd like to learn a little bit more about that. And organizing wildfires by acres burned highlights the importance of a few very large fires. The Wall of Fire burned more than 500,000 acres after it was ignited by an abandoned campfire, which is more than the average number of acres burned by human ignited wildfires over the past 15 years. So just a few very large fires are really responsible for a lot of the acres burned here. Proximity to roads, energy infrastructure, and houses are good predictors of wildfire ignitions in human-dominated landscapes. The connection between development and wildfire ignitions is important because, as you know, so many people are living in the wild and urban interface, and this is just continuing to develop. And so as the WUI grows, so does the potential for human-caused ignitions. And we must make sure that our prevention programs kind of keep up with the growth of the wild and urban interface. So here, in the report, we go into more detail about the location of ignitions. And really just, since we have great data a lot of times on the location of ignitions, we just want to know, can we use this to better prevent human-caused ignitions? And as you all know, this type of spatial information is key to prioritizing the location of signage and where staff time is spent. So we just thought, spatial data could be really helpful in this conversation. And that really kind of just led us to see that, in general, more knowledge about spatial patterns of human ignitions presents a huge opportunity for targeted outreach and education and a really cost-effective way to reduce wildfire impacts. And so we'd like to see, more spatial data analysis. Another thing we covered in the 2018 report is signage. This is obviously a kind of a joke poster here. I don't think you'll actually see this out on the forest, but I would probably crack up if I did. This is a Star Wars reference here for all you Star Wars folks out there. But yeah, so just taking a little break here and kind of switching gears to talking about signage. One of the things that came up in their 2018 report was signage. Signage is a really important tool. So as we were working on this report, it highlighted that signage is a great way to communicate with the public. And obviously, there's a lot of different kinds of signs. We have more detailed step-by-step approaches like the one on the left, as well as maybe more iconic and simple messages like the one on the right. Maybe there on the left, you see some more temporary signage like the yellow cards that are often attached to more permanent signs, or permanent signs themselves as the one on the right that are actually like anchored into the ground with fire prevention messages. And we just wondered how well these signs worked. That was a huge question that came up in the 2018 report. So yeah, in trying to understand the effectiveness of these signs, we learned that the most recent investigation into wildfire prevention signage was over 40 years ago. And so, for example, while the Forest Service provides detailed guidance on how to erect fire danger rating signs, the actual mechanics of it, there's little research on the effectiveness of these signs or the comparison between sign designs or messages. And you can even take this deeper of like, within specific communities, how might some messages be more or less effective? In New Mexico, we have a lot of different communities. We have tribal communities. We have a lot of Hispanic or Spanish speaking communities. And so we're curious, how are different signs effective in different communities? And how can we get to know what works best? So in fact, in some signs that were intended to raise awareness of the risks of unattended campfires may be causing more confusion than awareness. For example, the sign that you're seeing on the screen now with the shovel and a bucket, which bears the message required for camping, has been confused with a message about wilderness hygiene. So this sign is designated to emphasize the importance of coming prepared with the right tools whenever lighting a campfire. But this crucial message might not be obvious to everyone, and it could be confused with a message about cleaning up after yourself. So we're not saying that, again, that we have the answers to these challenges, but we're interested in really being a part of this discussion and bringing up these discussions with this group that has so much expertise. So those are some of the things that came out of the 2018 report. Some of the factors that make up prevention programs, such as the different spatial distributions of human ignitions, different types of human ignitions, decisions related to signage, and others. We realize that many of these decisions and the budgets about these factors were made at the ranger district level. When we're talking about the Forest Service, they were made at the ranger district level. Again, in this report, this smaller report, we focus primarily on the Forest Service, but this local level decision-making and budget allocation may apply to other agencies. We didn't look at BLM or other agencies, so I don't know if that's the case, but in order to learn about what is working and what is not, we wanted to look at investment in fire prevention awareness and get a better understanding of the variation in fire prevention programs at the ranger district level. And so we wanted to look at investment in fire prevention at the ranger district level. And so in 2020, the Guild completed a follow-up report that explores federal investment in fire prevention awareness at the ranger district and forest levels. This report is titled Investing in Wildfire Prevention, and it aimed to better understand the Forest Service's contribution to public awareness of wildfire risk by documenting investment in prevention programs. And we looked at 8 ranger districts on the Santa Fe and Coconino National Forest. So it was an exploratory study. Since there's no budget or line item to document investment in fire prevention, data was collected through in-person and telephone interviews with fire prevention technicians and fire management officers. So prevention, as I'll talk about in just a second here, is kind of pulled from the broader fire preparedness budget. There's not a specific line item for prevention. And so we conducted semi-structured interviews with 12 different fire prevention technicians and fire management officers across 8 ranger districts to better understand how fire prevention is funded at the ranger district level. And through these interviews, we were able to explore some of the variation between ranger district prevention programs, as well as some of the shared challenges. And so we found things that were very different, as well as some things that, of course, were shared challenges. Overall, we found that prevention programs were funded out of the overall preparedness budget at the ranger district level. So there's this broader preparedness budget that comes from the Washington office level, goes down to the regional level, down to the forest level, and even down to the ranger district level. And then from that preparedness budget, the prevention allocation is done at the ranger district level. And so these programs at that ranger district level, the fire prevention programs, they were paid for by preparedness funding for both staff time and for annual materials budget. And so all the prevention programs that we learned about covered the time of a GS7 prevention technician. So they covered an annual prevention personnel. They covered all their staff time, and possibly with some seasonal support in the summer. Some of the prevention programs brought in seasonal prevention support. And it also paid for the annual materials budget, which was allocated by the fire management officer based on forecasted fire and fuel conditions in the upcoming fire season. So there's a staff time, and then there's also this materials budget. And the staff time was typically a GS7 prevention tech annually with some seasonal support. And then the materials budget varied depending on the year and was based on the fire management officer's forecast of fire and fuel conditions. And so, for example, if the FMO predicted fire restrictions or closures in the upcoming year, then the materials budget may have been increased to account for additional signage or additional prevention resources to help with those closures and those restrictions. So it kind of fluctuated based on the anticipated fire season. The highest reported district prevention budgets for fire prevention were for the time were for a GS7 fire prevention technician, as I said. And although not all the prevention technicians that we spoke with were at the GS7 level, that GS7 level was kind of the highest level of prevention technician that we encountered in our study. And 7 out of the 8 districts funded 1 prevention technician's time annually. Only one of the ranger districts funded 2 prevention technicians. So it was most typical to have just 1 prevention technician and just have that 1 personnel kind of holding down the program. Multiple districts did report adding temporary seasonal prevention staff that they can bring in for part of the year to kind of help with posting signage and other activities. So we use that GS7 technician, and GS7 is the general scale. It's a pay scale. The GS is a level of pay scale within our national government here. So the GS7 technician, I think the highest pay band they can get to is around 50,000 or something in there. And so when we extended that across the approximately 400 prevention technicians in the national budget, we get a high estimate of about 20 million spent on prevention staff time. So about 20 million spent on those prevention technician staff time out of the 1.3 billion spent on wildfire preparedness more broadly. And so this graphic on the left or on the screen here shows kind of the proportion of money spent on prevention technicians' time versus the overall preparedness budget. And so this accounts for about 2% of the total preparedness budget is the prevention technicians' time, which are a huge part of the programs. We also asked FMOs and prevention technicians to report the amount that they allocated from the overall budget, the overall preparedness budget, to prevention program for materials. So these materials included like signage, swag, like Smokey the Bear's Frisbees, for example, training and other firefighting equipment, like having a pump on the back of the fire prevention technician's truck so they can put out abandoned campfires. And so when we looked at these budgets in relation to the overall visitation, we kind of looked at these materials budgets as a proportion of the overall visitation to try and understand kind of the amount spent based on visitation. And we found that the Santa Fe spent $24 on prevention materials for each 1,000 visitors, while the Coconino spent about $3 on prevention materials for each 1,000 visitors. And this isn't to say that, the Coconino numbers aren't low because they invest significantly less in prevention materials, but because their visitation is so high on the Coconino, these investments are relatively less per the amount of people that they're trying to reach with that investment. So we tried to put it in kind of relation to the amount of visitation here using national visitor use monitoring data. And just kind of real quickly, I just want to share some of the findings based on our conversations with prevention personnel and our experience gathering information about prevention programs. We found that increased clarity about the Forest Service investments in prevention would help identify what is working and where increased resources are necessary. A lot of the fire management officers and the technicians that we spoke with reported that each year prevention budgets fluctuated in relation to estimated suppression needs. So it made it difficult to track investments in fire prevention and evaluate the effectiveness of investments at reducing human-caused ignitions. So just kind of having a better idea of what the budgets for fire prevention are. Someone's mic is on. Making it difficult to track. So we just wanted to understand how much is being invested each year so that we can kind of use that information to see how does that affect the number of abandoned campfires, for example. So we can track how is investment effective at reducing the number of human-caused ignitions and potential human-caused ignitions through abandoned campfires. We also found that most ranger districts we interviewed lack capacity to accomplish both suppression and prevention tasks at some point during the fire season. So in other words, balancing suppression duties with public education duties is a widespread challenge for prevention technicians, particularly during the summer months. So prevention staff often have a firefighting responsibility as well. So they are out on initial attack sometimes. And these prevention staff are not able to prioritize efforts to educate forest users, particularly urban forest users who are coming in from the outside, or outreach to the general public during fire season. A lot of what we heard was that prevention technicians kind of have so much of a role updating signage on the forest and being pulled into initial attack of abandoned campfires, that it's difficult for them to get out and interact with the public outside of the forest during fire season. So that can be a challenge to kind of sharing that message of fire prevention during fire season. We also found that, the forest level prevention plans, so at the national forest level, these plans are an important tool that the Forest Service uses for tracking and evaluating prevention programs. But these plans varied in detail and time since they had been updated. Some districts described broad fire prevention plan, but across the 8 ranger districts in our research, these district level plans were written to be very flexible and to accommodate kind of the unpredictable nature of the prevention technicians' fire suppression duties. So it's kind of a challenge for them to account for their time spent on prevention versus initial attack. And I know those things are linked, but kind of the education piece versus actually putting out abandoned campfires and things like that, updating signage. Ranger District fire prevention technicians contribute to the completion of actionable fire prevention plans by identifying, collecting, and preserving evidence in the probable cause of wildfires on the district. And so a lot of what we heard from fire prevention technicians is they're out there collecting data and gathering evidence in the probable cause of wildfires. And this district level data for abandoned campfires is then called into dispatch and aggregated at the national forest level. So this data of the number of abandoned campfires, the probable cause of wildfires, is essential to prevention programs. This is that spatial data we were talking about earlier. And it includes the annual number of abandoned campfires and human-caused wildfires. But when we were trying to access some of that data, it can be difficult for outside organizations to obtain that data at the national forest level, which makes it hard to evaluate the success of prevention programs and identify where capacity may be improved through partnership with outside agencies and organizations. Again, I also want to come back to the categorization of the miscellaneous category. This is the second largest type of human ignition behind campfires in the Southwest, this miscellaneous human ignition. And so this is also kind of, it's a challenge to categorize, but I think as we continue to gain clarity around the miscellaneous category, we may lead to kind of a refinement in prevention programs and a better understanding of what's falling into this miscellaneous category so often. And so in light of recent initiatives like the National Cohesive Fire Management Strategy, Good Neighbor Authority, and Shared Stewardship Strategy, these are some initiatives in the U.S. right now. We recommend greater information sharing and transparency about the challenges that fire prevention programs face with human-caused ignitions. And this is in the spirit of kind of working together and continuing the conversation around what's actually going on the ground. Okay, that was a lot there about the 2 reports that we've done in the last couple of years, just kind of beginning to explore kind of the world of fire prevention, and kind of moving from our experience working on those reports. We had this question of how can we work together with federal agencies and across boundaries and in this collective approach to fire prevention to fill capacity gaps. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Again, I'm going to come back to the National Cohesive Wildfire Management Strategy. I know I'm kind of like thumping on that a little bit, but this really, this point in the fire, the fire management strategy about fire adapted communities, I think is really important. Communities that are adapted to wildfire are empowered and proactive with wildfire prevention. And so, as experts in fire prevention, our land management agencies can work towards sharing that responsibility for fire prevention and really being leaders in fire prevention, but bringing the public and outside organizations along and kind of encouraging them to be a part of that message. And I think, many of us, I think all of us know good old Smokey the Bear, who's carried the message that, if this is going to work, it has got to be about everyone. Only you can prevent wildfires. I think that message that it's got to be about everyone is something that we as prevention folks can really work towards and kind of sharing that responsibility for fire prevention. And, we really see this in our landscape that the public is ready for this or wants this a lot. I attended one wildfire preparedness day event, for example, in a high-risk community, and I had multiple people asked to be like deputized as fire prevention technicians, basically. They're asking where they can hang signs. They're wanting to share information. A couple folks wanted to come up with a program where they could leave 5-gallon buckets of water at campsites. So I just think there's so much interest in getting involved in this because they see how this affects their community's wildfire risk, and they want to be a part of it. And so I think this is a real opportunity for us in prevention to kind of get involved with these communities and find organizations that can kind of mobilize people for us. And so I recognize that the partnerships for fire prevention will vary for different aspects of the fire prevention triangle. Obviously education will require a different set of stakeholders than enforcement or engineering. But I think there are examples of partnerships around enforcement or engineering that are very effective to kind of growing the capacity for fire prevention and kind of sharing that responsibility. I think we've seen a lot of the utilities, electric utilities, kind of being a part. They're being held accountable and becoming a part of the conversation as they have for a long time around wildfire prevention. So seeing these partnerships form in a bunch of different ways. Here I want to share, some of you may be familiar with the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network. And so, in the cohesive strategy, we have this idea of fire adapted communities, but how do we put that into practice? And so the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, which created this graphic, is really trying to put that idea into practice. And this is the framework that they've come up with that you see on the screen here. And this Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network exists to support and connect people and communities working on wildfire resilience. And so this learning network is a space for forming partnerships, sharing ideas, and gaining access to new ideas. So it's kind of an opportunity for experimentation and creative approaches to new problems that we're facing. And so this graphic from the National Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network shows that fire prevention is within the larger set of topics that make up a successful wildland fire management strategy. So you see prevention there. They actually recently added prevention to this graphic, which is a very important part of their approach, which I think creates some space for us to get engaged with this learning network. The Fire Adapted Communities Framework helps us to share that responsibility for fire management into our communities. And so, building connections and working together through partnerships really allows us to bring in new stakeholders into the conversation around fire prevention. So how can we share responsibility for fire prevention with our local communities and get them involved in our education and outreach around fire prevention? And so I want to share some examples of things that I've come across. These have come through my email of what I think are, creative partnerships for fire prevention. I know the ones on the screens here might be familiar to all of you, or some of you. We see, given that the human ignitions across ownerships and jurisdictions, there's so many. We see so many human ignitions across ownerships and jurisdictions. And understandably, public land management agencies struggle to keep up. There's a lot across all jurisdictions. And of course, we need Smokey the Bear as one way to reach occasional forest visitors, but the number of abandoned campfires after 75 years of Smokey Bear suggests that additional approaches are needed. We need both. Capacity gaps in prevention, education, and coordination and communication of restrictions may be improved through partnerships with outside organizations. And so how can we work with outside organizations to share this message, to improve our communication and coordination of restrictions and prevention messages? The One Less Spark campaign is a good example of an awareness program that was created through partnership between land management agencies. This includes the Forest Service, CAL FIRE, Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Cal Emergency Management, Fire Safe Councils, the BLM, National Park Service. And so, that One Less Spark campaign is a good example of this kind of awareness program. Leave No Trace is another good example of an effective partnership for fire prevention at the national level. Before being infused with fire prevention messaging, I get a kick out of this. The Leave No Trace program used to advise that participants burn their toilet paper. That's, something that would kind of get rid of the waste. But you can imagine the frustration of having to fight toilet paper ignited fires. And so this kind of partnership between fire prevention and Leave No Trace really, you reach a different audience, and we can kind of infuse different organizations with the fire prevention message, such as Leave No Trace. Care for Colorado is another great example of an effective partnership between Colorado Tourism Department and the Leave No Trace program at the statewide scale. And this effort shares many messages, including fire prevention. So what stakeholders may exist at the local or regional level that your fire prevention program may be able to work together with to reach new audiences and share creative messages that spread awareness of fire prevention? So how can we work with others to kind of extend our capacity and reach new audiences? This is another example. This is kind of a high profile example. This might be, this is at the national level here. But, there's opportunities at all scales to work with the outdoor industry and with tourism and recreation partners. This can be at the local, regional, and national levels. This may be including working with a tourism and recreation department at the community level or right in your town, or with an outdoor brand like Filson, for example, at the national level. So here you see, some materials that were created by Bronco and Filson, which are two iconic American brands. And these two companies collaborated to raise funds in support of the National Forest Foundation's reforestation programs and to promote fire prevention awareness. So these are some examples of kind of different approaches of partnership. I wanted to highlight this one. I got a huge kick out of these Fire Sense videos from Utah's Fire Sense program. This is a partnership between agencies that kind of created some novel messaging and creative ways to reach new audiences. So this Fire Sense program is a collaboration between the Utah Department of Natural Resources, the BLM, the Forest Service, the National Park Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the BIA. And this effort includes creative, kind of social media worthy videos of fire prevention messages and simple taglines that emphasize the importance of reducing human-caused ignitions of various types. I don't have time, I think, to share this video, but it's a really funny, kind of lighthearted video about fire prevention. And I think it's the type of thing that folks would share on social media to their friends, family, and neighbors. And so by kind of creating these partnerships and creating new messages around fire prevention, we can reach more people. So kind of leading out of some of these approaches that I thought were creative, I wanted to kind of offer up some discussion points here. These are just, I just want to offer up these kind of reframings to fuel some discussion over the next couple of days, potentially. And one of those is just kind of reframing how we approach prevention from residents or visitors are the problem. I know a lot of us don't think about it that way, but sometimes I think I do. Residents or visitors are the problem, and moving towards residents and visitors are the solution. So really working with the people coming in to share that message. How can we get them to kind of work with us and kind of carry that fire prevention message and share that responsibility? So here's another one. And again, I'm just interested in what you all think of these kind of reframing. So this doesn't have to be, these are just, I'm just offering these up as a discussion piece here, but reframing how we approach prevention from agencies are primarily responsible and solely tasked with fire prevention towards agencies are leaders in fire prevention and can work in partnership to create new messages and reach new audiences. So really kind of thinking about sharing that responsibility for fire prevention and how can agencies be this role of an expert and a leader that brings other folks along and kind of encourages and empowers other organizations to be a part of that. Again, offering up a new reframing from collecting data for an internal agency use and tracking. A lot of the data that we used for our reports was very much geared for internal consumption, but can we work towards collecting, refining, and sharing data on human ignitions and fire prevention activities to identify opportunities for partnership? Can some of that spatial data and effectiveness tracking be shared out to find gaps that we can work with others to fill? And so this is just, suggestion or an opportunity for discussion here. Okay, and kind of rounding off my time today, but I just wanted to share a couple of what I consider the take homes are. I know I shared a lot of information here, but what I really want to say is that, the Forest Stewards Guild is here to learn and to advance conversation over the next couple of days with you all. And I really want to be a part of this discussion going forward. I think fire prevention, as we all know, is effective at reducing human-caused ignitions, this fire prevention awareness. And so we really want to continue to grow this conversation and continue to share information and really learn about how we can do this more effectively, as so many of you are already doing. And to do that, we need data, and we need information sharing across the board. This is everything from sharing, numbers of abandoned campfires to coordination between agencies at the statewide level about restrictions and closures. All this data and information sharing is really the connective tissue of fire prevention that's going to help us work together and be effective at growing the conversation as we move into the future. And then finally, I just wanted to say that, the organization, the Forest Stewards Guild, and myself, we're all committed to sharing the responsibility for fire prevention as a part of living within a fire adapted community. And I really wanted to kind of share that idea of the fire adapted communities with you all, from the cohesive strategy into the fire adapted communities learning network, which is now talking about fire prevention. I encourage this group to get involved in those conversations around fire prevention through the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, if you're interested. And so just kind of continuing this discussion, continuing to experiment, and continuing to work together for fire prevention. And finally, I just want to thank you all for listening. As I said, I'm very excited to be a part of this group and to learn over the next couple of days. And please let me know if you have any questions now or after the talk. You can reach out to me. My email is up on the screen now. And I'd be happy to hear from anyone out there in the audience today. I know there's so much expertise in this group today. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here.
Okay, thanks so much, Gabe. That was an excellent presentation and a great way to kick off what the next 2 days are going to be like for all of us. We do have some technical difficulties with our next presentation, so we do actually have just a couple minutes for a question that did come in.
Great.
One question was, how were the Guild's research projects funded?
Yeah, so the Guild works, our organization, the Forest Stewards Guild, was connected to an organization called the Forest Trust, which is in the Santa Fe area and focuses a lot on private land. And so one of the founders of the Forest Trust was one of the early founders of the Forest Stewards Guild, and has kind of a personal interest in fire prevention because he works so much on private land. He's wanted to kind of help kind of the Guild become a part of that conversation around fire prevention. And so a lot of our research was funded by kind of small sums of money from the Forest Trust that were kind of given to us as grant funding. And so we've worked with that funding for the last couple of years. And then we also try and provide match from other pots of money. We work with fire adapted communities, the Learning Network nationally. We get a little bit of funding that can support not necessarily the research, but some of the relationship building that led to the research. Like in our Investing in Fire Prevention report, there was a lot of connections with agency fire prevention folks that Fire Adapted Communities funding can help support those relationship building. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. The Forest Trust funding was a huge part of it. And I want to thank Henry Carey for that who is, an early member of the Forest Stewards Guild and has really kind of helped us grow our organization into the conversation around fire prevention.
Great, excellent. And just one more quick question also. You've got some great products out there with everything you've been doing. So how can people get samples of your products?
Yeah, so I tried to upload some reports into this Excel events platform. I don't know what it looks like on your end. They might be accessible through this talk somehow. If not, I can share a couple links here if that's helpful to the audience. Does that work, Karen?
I believe so. If you just put it in the chat, or if there's links that you can drop in the chat that people can access.
Yeah, I have a couple links to the reports here. I'll just drop in real quick.
Okay.
So let's see here in the chat to you all. We have the first link is the Investing in Fire Prevention report. And I'll drop the link. That's our most recent report. And then I want to find our initial report, which is called Reducing Human-Caused Ignitions and Increasing Fire Prevention Awareness in Northern New Mexico. That is on the Forest Stewards Guild website. And you can find all these on the Forest Stewards Guild's website under publications. So I'm going to type in this one, increasing wildfire and then there's the second report. And I'll just also drop a link to the Forest Stewards Guild's website to you all here. Thanks for bearing with me here as I'm like typing. I know this isn't the most engaging thing to probably be watching, but
Oh, you're totally fine.
So it's coming through. Here's the Guild's website. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about our organization, like I said, we're a membership organization, and so we have a lot of management publications that we put out for our members. We do a lot of events for our members, and so I encourage you all to please consider membership or to check out the organization itself. There's a lot of really great stuff in there and a history of kind of working with managers. And then the other thing I always like to plug is I work a lot on fire adapted communities through the Learning Network nationally, and then also in our statewide Learning Network. And so becoming a part of that fire adapted communities approach is really effective to kind of building those relationships and providing opportunities for experimentation and peer learning that I think are essential to addressing some of these novel challenges of a growing wild and urban interface, aging infrastructure, all different kinds of things that we're starting to deal with, increasing wildfire frequency and severity from climate change. All these challenges require novel approaches, and I think we need experimentation for that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gabe. And thank you for being our keynote speaker. And like I said, really just setting up everything that we're going to be talking and representing for the next 2 days. So thank you so much for your time, Gabe. And then if anybody has any follow-up questions for Gabe that may come to you later, he will be a part of our panel discussion tomorrow afternoon. So you can catch him there as well. So thanks so much, Gabe. I'm going to leave this current session open for just a little bit longer for people to be able to access those links and get that information downloaded. So thanks so much, Gabe.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
We'll see y'all in the next session. Thanks so much.
Bye.